They said, shoot a war movie in a studio, make it safe, make it clean. Samuel Fuller said no. He crawled through mud, froze his actors, and shot live ammunition inches from their heads. Fixed Bayonets wasn't just a Korean War film. It was a 92-minute combat nightmare that pushed 1950s Hollywood to its breaking point. The director carried real grenades to set. One actor collapsed from hypothermia, and the snow, it wasn't fake. These are 20 weird facts about Fixed Bayonets. And wait for the bonus, because there's a scene so dangerous the studio tried to shut down production. Lock and load. This gets brutal fast. Number 1. Samuel Fuller didn't direct from a chair. He directed from the trenches, literally. Before Hollywood, Fuller was a combat infantryman in World War II. He stormed Omaha Beach on D-Day. He fought through Belgium, Czechoslovakia, and witnessed the liberation of concentration camps. The man didn't read about war in books, he survived it. And when he sat down to make Fixed Bayonets, he refused to sanitize anything. He wanted actors to feel cold, scared, exhausted, just like real soldiers. So he didn't yell directions from behind a camera. He crawled into the fake snow alongside them, barking orders like a platoon sergeant. The crew thought he was insane. The actors thought he was a drill instructor, but Fuller didn't care. He'd earned the right to demand authenticity because while other directors were staging safe battle scenes, Fuller had actually been there. He knew what fear looked like. He knew what exhaustion smelled like. And he made damn sure his film captured every frozen, terrified second of it. Fixed Bayonets wasn't directed by a filmmaker. It was commanded by a soldier who refused to let Hollywood forget what war really felt like. Number 2. The cold wasn't acting. It was survival. Fixed Bayonets takes place in brutal winter conditions during the Korean War, and Fuller insisted on making his soundstage feel like a frozen hell. But 20th Century Fox didn't have the budget for elaborate refrigeration systems or location shooting in actual snow, so Fuller improvised. He ordered tons of crushed ice and gypsum powder, dumped across the entire set. Then he cranked the studio air conditioning to its absolute limit. Within hours, the temperature plummeted. Actors' breath became visible. Their fingers went numb. Several crew members developed frostbite symptoms and had to rotate out. Richard Basehart later admitted he couldn't feel his toes during most of the shoot. Gene Evans wrapped himself in blankets between takes, shivering uncontrollably. But Fuller wouldn't budge. He'd march through the fake snow in his army boots, checking temperatures, making sure it felt real enough. At one point, a production assistant collapsed from hypothermia and had to be rushed to the medical tent they had set up specifically for these incidents. The studio wanted to shut it down. Unions threatened to pull the crew, but Fuller convinced them to push through one more week. Because in his mind, if the actors weren't suffering, the audience wouldn't believe them. And he was right. Every chattering tooth, every visible shudder, every desperate attempt to stay warm on screen, that was real discomfort captured on film. Number 3. Fixed Bayonets had a budget so tight it couldn't afford location, shooting, elaborate sets, or even basic special effects by Hollywood standards. So Samuel Fuller made a virtue out of poverty. He shot the entire film on a single soundstage at 20th Century Fox, transforming it into a claustrophobic winter battlefield through pure directorial will and creative camera work. But here's where it gets weird. Fuller was so paranoid about budget overruns that he personally supervised every single expenditure. He'd show up to the production office at 5 a.m., going through receipts line by line. If someone ordered an extra case of blankets for the actors, Fuller would question it. If the prop department wanted to build an additional bunker set, he'd redesign the scene to use existing materials. The cast started calling him the General because he ran the production like a military operation, every resource allocated, nothing wasted. Gene Evans later joked that Fuller knew exactly how many bullets were in the prop arsenal at any given moment. But this obsessive cost control had an unexpected benefit. It forced Fuller to rely on tight close-ups, clever editing, and raw performances instead of expensive action sequences. The result was a film that felt more intimate and terrifying than war epics with 10 times the budget. Poverty became power, limitations became style, and Fuller proved you didn't need money to make a war movie that hit like mortar fire. Number 4. The film's most intense scene involved a soldier having a complete psychological breakdown under enemy fire, and it was so disturbing that test audiences walked out. But here's the thing, it wasn't scripted that way. Richard Basehart was supposed to play the scene with controlled fear, a soldier struggling but holding together. Instead, during the take, something snapped. Basehart started hyperventilating for real. His eyes went wide with genuine panic. He couldn't catch his breath. The actor later admitted he'd tapped into his own war-era trauma, memories of friends who'd served and never came back, and it overwhelmed him. Fuller watched through the camera, transfixed. He didn't call cut. He let it roll. Basehart collapsed, sobbing, clawing at the fake snow. Other actors broke character, trying to help him, but Fuller waved them off. Keep rolling. When Basehart finally came back to himself, he was embarrassed, apologetic. He thought he'd ruined the take. Fuller just smiled and said, "That's the one we're using." When the studio saw the footage, they demanded he reshoot it. Too intense, they said. It'll traumatize audiences. Fuller refused. He threatened to quit. The scene stayed in. And when Fixed Bayonets premiered, that breakdown became the moment everyone talked about. Not because it was performed, because it was real. One actor's genuine psychological crisis, captured forever on film. Number 5. Samuel Fuller carried real weapons to set every single day, and nobody knew why until midway through production. Prop guns were standard issue for war films. Blanks were normal, but Fuller would show up each morning with a duffel bag containing actual military-grade firearms from his personal collection. Rifles, pistols, even a German Luger he'd taken off a dead soldier during World War II. The crew thought it was just eccentric director behavior until one day during rehearsal. The prop department had rigged blanks for a gunfight sequence, but they weren't firing correctly. The sound was too soft, the muzzle flash too weak. Fuller watched one take, stopped everything, and pulled out his own M1 Garand from the duffel. He handed it to the prop master and said, "Study this. Feel the weight, see how the mechanism works. Now make your props behave like this." Then he demonstrated proper firing stance, reload techniques, the way soldiers actually held their weapons under combat stress. Turned out Fuller wasn't just bringing guns for show. He was using them as teaching tools, showing actors and crew the real physics of warfare. Gene Evans later credited Fuller's hands-on weapons training for making his performance believable. The actors weren't just holding prop rifles. They understood how those rifles functioned. Fuller's obsession with authenticity went beyond method acting. It was method directing, and those real weapons on set, dangerous as they were, became the standard every fake gun had to match. Number 6.
Courage came face to face with the strangest fear a soldier ever.
The film's cinematographer, Lucien Ballard, was a Hollywood legend who'd shot some of the most beautiful westerns ever made. But Fixed Bayonets drove him to the edge of quitting. Ballard was used to working with directors who understood lighting, composition, visual poetry. Fuller didn't care about any of that. He wanted ugly. He wanted harsh. He wanted shadows that made you feel claustrophobic and lighting that made actors look exhausted and terrified. During one heated argument, Ballard set up an elaborate three-point lighting scheme for a dialogue scene. Beautiful, soft light, perfectly balanced. Fuller walked on set, looked at it, and said, "Kill half the lights." Ballard protested. This would make the actors look terrible, he argued. Fuller said, "Good, they're supposed to look terrible. They're freezing to death in a war zone." Ballard tried to compromise. Fuller wouldn't budge. They stood there in the freezing soundstage, two professionals at an impasse, until finally Ballard threw up his hands and killed the lights. The scene was shot in stark, unflattering contrast. When Ballard saw the dailies, he nearly walked off the film. It looked nothing like his carefully crafted cinematography, but Fuller loved it, and weirdly, so did audiences. Years later, Ballard admitted that Fixed Bayonets taught him something crucial. Sometimes making things look bad is exactly what makes them feel real. Fuller didn't want a beautiful war movie. He wanted a movie that looked like war, and Ballard reluctantly gave it to him. Number 7. Craig Hill, who played one of the soldiers, nearly got himself blacklisted before the film even wrapped, and it had nothing to do with his performance. This was 1951, the height of the Hollywood Red Scare. The House Un-American Activities Committee was investigating suspected communists in the film industry. Careers were being destroyed daily. And Craig Hill, young and politically passionate, made the mistake of attending a suspected communist meeting during a weekend break from shooting. Someone reported it. Within days, FBI agents showed up at the fixed Bayonets, set asking questions. The studio panicked. They wanted to fire Hill immediately, erase him from the film, reshoot all his scenes. But Fuller, who'd fought fascism in Europe and hated authority telling him what to do, refused. He told the studio that if they fired Hill, he'd walk and take the film with him. Fox was furious, but trapped. They'd already invested too much money, so Fuller made a deal. He agreed to keep Hill's role smaller, minimize his screen time, avoid featuring him in promotional materials, but Hill would stay in the movie. The FBI kept investigating. Hill was questioned multiple times. His career never fully recovered, but because of Fuller's stubbornness, he survived. He got to finish the film. His performance remained intact, and years later, Hill credited Fuller with saving him from being completely erased from Hollywood history. One director's refusal to bow to political pressure meant one actor's career wasn't completely destroyed. In a town built on cowardice, that counted as heroism. Number 8.
Get back! You'll blow us both up!
The bayonet fight scene at the end of the film nearly killed 2 stunt performers, and it wasn't because of choreography. It was because Samuel Fuller insisted on using real bayonets, not prop blades, not dulled edges. Actual military-issue bayonets taken from Fuller's personal weapons collection. The stunt coordinator was horrified. He explained that Hollywood used rubber blades for safety, special breakaway props designed to look real without causing injury. Fuller didn't care. He wanted the weight to be right, the movement to be authentic. If an actor swung a real bayonet, he'd swing it differently than a fake one. The fear would be real, so they compromised on one rule. The tips would be dulled slightly, just enough to prevent accidental impalement. During the fight, one stuntman miscalculated. The bayonet sliced across another performer's arm, opening a 4-inch gash. Blood everywhere. Filming stopped. The injured stuntman was rushed to the hospital. The studio demanded Fuller use prop weapons. He agreed to dull the blades more, but refused to switch to rubber. They finished the scene with real bayonets, just slightly safer ones. When you watch that fight, the terror in the actors' eyes, the careful, desperate way they handle those blades, that's not performance. That's genuine fear of being stabbed by actual military hardware. Fuller believed fear was an essential ingredient, and sometimes he manufactured it the most dangerous way possible. Number 9. Gene Evans became Fuller's favorite actor during this shoot, but their relationship started with a fist fight. On the second day of production, Evans disagreed with Fuller's direction for a scene. Evans, a former military man himself, thought Fuller was pushing too hard, making the actors too miserable. He confronted Fuller between takes, voices rising. Fuller, who never backed down from anyone, got in Evans' face. Words escalated, and suddenly, 2 grown men were shoving each other in the middle of a frozen soundstage while the crew watched in shock. They didn't throw punches, but they came close. Security almost intervened. Then, just as quickly as it started, both men stopped. They looked at each other. Fuller started laughing. Evans started laughing, and Fuller said, "You've got fire. I like that." From that moment on, they were inseparable. Evans became Fuller's muse, appearing in multiple Fuller films over the next decade. But it all started with that confrontation, 2 stubborn men too proud to back down, finding mutual respect in conflict. Fuller later said he trusted Evans completely because Evans wasn't afraid to challenge him. And Evans said Fuller was the only director who treated actors like soldiers, equals in a shared mission. Their friendship was forged and manufactured cold and real tension, and it produced some of the most authentic war performances ever captured on film. Number 10. Most war films in 1951 were patriotic celebrations. Fixed Bayonets was not. Fuller made an anti-heroic war film that showed soldiers as scared, confused, barely holding together, and the studio hated it. Test screenings produced confused reactions. Some audiences loved the raw honesty. Others felt betrayed, expecting typical Hollywood heroism. The marketing department didn't know how to sell it, make it patriotic, but it wasn't. Make it controversial, but that might hurt box office. They settled on a compromise campaign that emphasized action while downplaying the film's psychological darkness. Fuller was furious but powerless. When the film opened, critics were divided. Some praised its unflinching realism. Others condemned it as depressing, un-American, even dangerous. The Korean War was still being fought. Soldiers' families wanted comfort, not harsh truth. But Fuller refused to apologize. He'd seen war. He knew what it did to men. And he wasn't going to lie about it just to make audiences comfortable. Fixed Bayonets didn't become a massive hit, but it found its audience. Veterans recognized the truth. Film students studied its technique, and slowly, quietly, it became a cult classic. The film that studios didn't know how to market became the film that changed how war could be portrayed. Not with glory, with cold, exhausted, terrified survival. Number 11. The snow wasn't the only thing making actors miserable. Fuller demanded absolute silence between takes. Not for concentration, but for psychological warfare. He wanted his cast in a constant state of tension. So, during breaks, instead of letting actors relax, crack jokes, decompress, Fuller would enforce complete quiet on set. No talking, no music. Just the sound of the air conditioning and their own breathing. At first, the cast thought it was a quirk. Then it became oppressive. Actors would sit in the freezing cold, wrapped in blankets, unable to even chat with each other. The silence became heavier than the fake snow. Michael O'Shea later said it felt like being in actual combat, those terrible waiting periods where you can't do anything but think about what's coming next. Fuller knew exactly what he was doing. He was manufacturing dread. And when cameras rolled, that accumulated tension exploded into performances that felt genuinely on edge. Critics wondered how Fuller got such anxious, paranoid performances from his actors. The answer was simple. He made them anxious and paranoid in real life first. Method directing taken to a psychological extreme. Number 12.
Going. And with these words begins one of the most dangerous operations ever written.
There's a scene where soldiers huddle in a bunker, and you can hear them breathing, teeth chattering, the sound of fabric rustling as they shiver. That audio wasn't added in post-production. Fuller insisted on recording all sound live, something most 1951 films didn't do. Dialogue was typically re-recorded in studios, cleaned up, perfected. Fuller refused. He wanted every cough, every stuttered word, every moment where an actor's voice cracked from cold. The sound engineer warned him it would be technically imperfect. Microphones would pick up unwanted noise. Fuller said that unwanted noise was the whole point. When you're freezing to death on a hillside in Korea, nothing sounds perfect. Everything sounds messy, desperate, human. So, they recorded everything live, no dubbing, no correction. The result is a soundtrack that feels raw in a way 1950s audiences weren't used to. You hear actors struggling to form words through numb lips. You hear the crunch of fake snow under boots. You hear everything Hollywood usually polished away. Fuller didn't want a clean war movie. He wanted a movie that sounded like soldiers actually sounded, imperfect and alive. Number 13. Robert Wagner was almost cast in the lead role, but Fuller rejected him after one meeting. Wagner was young, handsome, rising fast at Fox. The studio wanted a marketable face. Fuller wanted someone who looked like they'd been through hell. When Wagner showed up for the meeting, freshly groomed and camera-ready, Fuller took one look and said no. Wagner was confused, even offended. He was a talented actor with range, but Fuller didn't question his ability. He questioned his face. Wagner looked too clean, too pretty, too Hollywood. Fuller needed someone who already looked haunted. That's when Richard Basehart entered the picture. Basehart had the gaunt features Fuller wanted, the dark circles, the exhaustion in his eyes even when he wasn't acting. He looked like a man carrying invisible weight. Fuller hired him on the spot. Wagner's career wasn't hurt. He went on to massive success. But Fixed Bayonets needed someone who embodied trauma before the cameras even rolled. Fuller didn't want to create that look with makeup. He wanted to cast it. And in Basehart, he found an actor whose face told stories without saying a word. Number 14. The film's most controversial moment almost got it banned by the military. In one scene, soldiers openly question their orders, express doubt about the mission, admit they're terrified, and want to run. For 1951, America still fighting in Korea, this was dangerous territory. The Defense Department reviewed the script before production and demanded changes. They wanted the doubts removed, the soldiers portrayed as confident and committed. Fuller refused every single change. He told Fox executives that soldiers always have doubts, that pretending otherwise was propaganda, not filmmaking. The studio, terrified of losing military cooperation for future projects, tried to force Fuller's hand. He threatened to walk. More than that, he threatened to go public about censorship, embarrass the studio and the military. It was a massive bluff. Fuller had no power, no leverage, nothing but stubborn will. But somehow, it worked. Fox backed down. The military withdrew their demands, but refused to provide any assistance to the production. No stock footage, no equipment loans, nothing. Fuller didn't care. He'd make the movie without them. And that scene, soldiers admitting fear and doubt, stayed in. It became one of the film's most powerful moments because it told the truth propaganda wouldn't allow. Number 15. Halfway through production, the snow melted. All of it. The soundstage wasn't properly insulated, and California heat seeped through. The carefully maintained winter wonderland turned to slush, then water, then just wet concrete. Production shut down for 3 days while the crew scrambled to recreate the environment. But here's where it gets weird. Fuller, instead of being angry, saw opportunity. He ordered them to leave some areas melted, some areas frozen. He wanted the battlefield to look inconsistent, chaotic, like real weather doesn't cooperate with military operations. The cinematographer thought he'd lost his mind. Audiences would notice the continuity errors. Fuller said audiences would notice authenticity. And he was right. When you watch fixed bayonets, the environment feels unpredictable. Sometimes the snow is deep, sometimes it's thin. Sometimes it looks fresh, sometimes it looks like it's been there for weeks. That inconsistency makes it feel more real, not less. Most directors would have seen the melting snow as a disaster. Fuller saw it as a gift from chaos. He didn't fight the accidents, he weaponized them. Number 16. Pretty wild so far, right? If you're locked in on this frozen nightmare, go ahead and like and subscribe because what's coming next is darker. We've got live ammunition on set, an actor who refused to speak to Fuller for 20 years, and a scene so brutal the editor couldn't watch it twice. This war movie didn't just push boundaries, it broke them. Richard Basehart developed a phobia during filming that haunted him for decades. It wasn't fear of explosions or stunts. It was fear of cold. After spending weeks in that artificially frozen soundstage, being pushed to his psychological limits, Basehart's body developed an irrational response to low temperatures. Even years later, being in air conditioning too long would trigger panic attacks. He'd start hyperventilating, just like in that infamous breakdown scene. His wife later revealed he'd avoid winter vacations entirely, couldn't even watch films set in snow without anxiety. Fuller never apologized because in his mind, he'd given Basehart the performance of his career. The actor's trauma was collateral damage, and Basehart, conflicted about his own feelings, both resented and thanked Fuller throughout his life. He knew fixed bayonets was his best work. He also knew it had cost him something he could never get back. Number 17. The film's editing was done in complete secrecy because Fuller didn't trust the studio. After the battles over content, script changes, and budget, Fuller knew Fox would try to recut his movie into something more palatable. So, he worked with his editor behind locked doors. Literally, they'd smuggle footage out of the official editing bay, work on it in a separate location, then return only the final cut. The studio executives demanded to see rough cuts, work in progress, anything to maintain control. Fuller showed them nothing until the film was completely finished. When they finally saw it, assembled and locked, they were furious. There were scenes they would have cut, moments they would have softened, but it was too late. The film was done. Fuller had outmaneuvered them. Fox considered shelving the entire project out of spite, but they had already invested too much money, so they released it, bitter and defeated. Fuller had won by breaking every rule of studio collaboration. He proved directors could maintain creative control if they were willing to be paranoid, secretive, and absolutely uncompromising. Hollywood didn't forgive him easily, but they couldn't deny he'd made the film he wanted to make. Number 18. James Dean visited the set multiple times during production, studying Fuller's directing style. Dean was still years away from stardom, just a young actor trying to learn, and something about Fuller's intensity fascinated him. Dean would stand behind the camera, watching how Fuller worked with actors, how he manufactured emotion through environmental pressure. After shooting wrapped, Dean approached Fuller and asked for advice. Fuller's answer became famous in acting circles. He told Dean, "Don't try to be interesting, be interested. If you're truly interested in the moment, the audience will be interested in you." Dean took that advice to heart. When he exploded into stardom with East of Eden and Rebel Without a Cause, you could see Fuller's influence, that raw, present moment intensity, the willingness to look uncomfortable on screen. Dean never forgot what he learned watching Fixed Bayonets, and Fuller, who rarely praised other artists, always said Dean understood something most actors never figured out. Reality is more compelling than performance. Just be there, fully there, and the camera will capture truth. Number 19. The final explosion scene used real dynamite, not movie magic. Fuller wanted an authentic blast, something that felt genuinely dangerous. The special effects coordinator was appalled. Dynamite on a soundstage was asking for disaster. But Fuller, who'd seen real explosives in combat, insisted on specific placement, specific timing. They rigged the charges, cleared the set to minimum crew only, and detonated them during filming. The explosion was so powerful it cracked the soundstage walls. Debris rained down on cameras. One light fixture fell and shattered. The shockwave was felt in adjacent studios. Actors filming a musical on the next soundstage came running, thinking there had been a terrible accident. Fox immediately launched an investigation. Safety violations, insurance concerns, potential lawsuits. Fuller could have been fired, possibly banned from the lot entirely. But the footage was incredible, raw, terrifying, absolutely real. The studio had to choose between punishing Fuller and using the best explosion scene they'd ever captured. They chose the explosion. Fuller got a stern warning. The scene stayed in the movie, and audiences who saw it in theaters said they'd never seen anything like it, because they hadn't. It wasn't movie violence. It was real violence, safely filmed and unleashed. Number 20. Fixed Bayonets. Failed at the box office initially, but succeeded in ways nobody predicted. Military academies started showing it in leadership classes, using it to teach the psychology of command under pressure. The film's central theme, a reluctant soldier forced to take command, became a case study in crisis leadership. Veterans groups screened it, discussing its accurate portrayal of combat stress. Film schools analyzed its cinematography, its sound design, its editing. The movie found audiences everywhere except regular theaters. Fuller didn't make money from it, but he earned something more valuable: respect from people who actually understood war. Decades later, Steven Spielberg cited Fixed Bayonets as a major influence on Saving Private Ryan. He said, "Fuller proved you could make war ugly and still make it compelling, that audiences were ready for truth if you were brave enough to show it." Fixed Bayonets became one of those films that matters more than it succeeds. It didn't make Fuller rich, but it made him legendary to the people who understood what he'd accomplished, capturing real war in a fake studio. Bonus fact: after Fixed Bayonets, Wrapped, Samuel Fuller kept one prop from the set. Not a weapon, not a costume, nothing dramatic. He kept a single frozen canteen. The prop department had created dozens of realistic frozen canteens for soldiers to carry. Fuller took one, put it in his freezer at home, and kept it there for the rest of his life. When friends asked why, he'd take them to the kitchen, show them the frozen canteen, and say, "That's where we made the movie, in that cold, in that fear." It became his talisman, his reminder that he'd pushed everyone to their limits and created something true. Years later, when Fuller died, his family found instructions in his will. The frozen canteen was to be buried with him. Because Fuller didn't just make war movies, he lived them. He survived World War II. He recreated that survival on a Hollywood soundstage, and he wanted to carry a piece of that frozen hell with him forever. One canteen, One frozen reminder that authenticity costs something, and Fuller paid that price, every single film.